So off the train, fresh off the boat. Out of the train station with my new brother, Jim, me and Mom, and I can't remember if anybody was with him. Maybe there was, I can't remember. But out the front of the train station and looked around and saw the area around the train station, which was just magical and mind-boggling to me at that point in my life. And out into this old red, I think it was an Oldsmobile Cutlass, beautiful old car, and into that car, and away we went, the 60 miles or so down to Lunenburg County, to the community of Northfield, where he lived, on a dirt road back there, in a house that he built himself. And I was immediately confronted with just culture shock. These people were not city folks. That's all I'd ever seen in my life, were city people. They lived in the woods, isolated. There was no neighbor. You couldn't see neighbors. There was, they were in a forest. I had never seen a house in a forest. And, there was a wood stove in the house. There was all these things that, I don't know, I just never saw them before. The milkman came to their house and delivered things, milk and orange juice. There was this orange drink they had that I'd never heard of called Beep, that I became addicted to. I was a Beep addict after a few days. And then I met Jim's wife, a wonderful woman, incredible woman, so funny and kind, and Jim was funny and kind. Jim, I just loved that man. He was another hero, he was slim and blonde-haired and just super cool, kind of no BS kind of guy, and he was real nice to me, and he made, he picked on me. The way that, and I would find out the hard way that in Nova Scotia, for an outsider, there's a fair bit of hazing going on. And the first thing that confronted me was the fact that James had 3 children. The youngest, the girl, was only 5. The next one, Shane, was the same age as me, 12. And then the eldest son, also named James, was 18 years old. I was their uncle. I was 12 years old, and I was uncle to an 18-year-old man. And there was a strange vibe amongst all of the kids. Like, the little girl, she was beautiful, and she just, was a sweetheart like her mom and dad, and James was this tall, young man, smart, really smart, headed to college, wore glasses, just a super amazing kid. But he was a man. He was 18 years old. And then Shane was a lunatic. Shane, and I say that in a loving way, but he hazed the crap out of me. I mean, the first morning we woke up there, he came aboard me in the living room. I don't remember if he hit me or put me in a wrestling hold, or he friggin' near killed me. He was strong as an ox, like his father. And his dad came in and caught him messing with me and said, leave him alone. Leave him alone. What's wrong with you? And then a couple of days later, he took me out for a walk. We were supposed to be going somewhere, and he took me way the hell down this railroad line. I didn't know where we were. Took me way down there, and all the way down there, he was kind of like talking about burying bodies and like all this, trying to freak me out, and he was freaking me out. And then we get way the hell down this rail line, and I look around, and he's gone. He left me there. And I had to find my way back to the house, which was a bit tense for a bit, because I couldn't remember where the hell we we came onto the line. That was the kind of things that were going on. We were only there, I don't know how many days we stayed there before we moved on to the next family member, but this was what was going on, and it was actually funny. I laugh at it now, but then at that point in time, like, you know, there's a lot of things that people did to me in my lifetime where if I had to come from a normal household, I could have just sloughed it off and walked it off, and I wouldn't even have thought twice about it. But because I was being physically and mentally attacked and emotionally attacked all the time in my house by my own mother, I took things way more personal than I probably should have. But by the same token, that reaction and my mistrust of everybody probably saved my life a few times. And matter of fact, I know it did. And but those things, I took them really hard. My feelings were easily hurt, and you'd think you'd get tough after getting your ass kicked every day by your mother, but I didn't. I got softer. And I'm still soft. I cry at the drop of a hat. I always have. People don't even know that. But I mean, I can't watch sad movies. I can't watch animals suffering. I can't watch people suffering. I just can't. I start crying. I'll cry at the drop of a hat. I've been like that all my life. And I'm easily hurt. And these things, which were probably just stupid hazing, you know, kids challenging each other. He just met me, as you know, a lot of the people I would meet, a lot of the children I would meet, you know, in the beginning of this experience in this province, I was being challenged in the pack. You know, kids are pack animals. There's always an alpha, and there's always a bunch of subordinates, and the alpha's always a bully. And so it's, I went away from that scene, you know, not liking Shane very much. And in later years, I came to love the guy. He's a great guy, and he's like his dad. And so it was all really weird and surreal, and there was no tension that I could tell between Jim and Mum. He was just so glad to have her there. I think they talked about things a little bit, you know, what was going on at the time of his surrender to Viva. And we had some outdoor activities, barbecues and stuff, and Jim told us stories about his life, and he was very forthright about, you know, his anger, his violent streak, and he'd make a joke about it, right? And I never saw it. He was brusque, you know. He ordered the kids around and ordered his wife around, and but it was all in good nature. It was always good fun. He wasn't being really mean. He was putting on he was just being gruff and rough, and he'd look at you and smile out of the corner of his mouth, you know, like he was really a friggin' cool guy, like, and still is. And he's a lot older now. He's well into his 70s, and but he had a profound effect on me. I had another, you know, kind of another hero to emulate, but it was hard to emulate him because he was one of a kind. So from there, we went to see Viva. They took us out to this little house out on the outside. I'm pretty sure it was on the outskirts of Bridgewater, in Lunenburg County. I'm pretty sure. I can't really remember. It wasn't far, I don't think. And we went to this little farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It was nothing around it, just farmland. And we went into this little farm. Well, actually, it was a big kind of a big old farmhouse. You know, like the 2 stories with a veranda and all that stuff. And we met this frail little old lady at the door, you know, who was very old, very frail, and she let me and my mother in the house, and I just still couldn't understand the relationship between her and my mother. I don't to this day. I don't know who she was to my mother. It was almost like it was a secret. And I didn't even stay in the house. I went outside because I'd never seen a farm. So I was outside, like, looking at, there was some cows, and maybe there might have been a horse. And I was outside looking at the animals and looking around, walking around, and I kind of missed the whole visit, really. I remember going inside, I think, having a cup of tea and a biscuit or a cookie or something that she made, and it was just a strange, short visit. And I never saw that woman again, and neither did my mother. And we left. It was we might have been there an hour or two, maybe an hour, I don't know. And we left. And then from there, and I don't even remember how we were getting around to these places. I think possibly Jim was driving us around where we needed to go. And while all this was going on, I think Bob and Joe and Dave were all looking for a place for us to live. I think that we didn't have that sorted out, or if we did, the place where we ended up going to was not available just yet. We were waiting to get into it. The next place we went was to my mother's sister's place, Wilda, in Middleton, Nova Scotia. And Wilda and her husband, Reg, owned a taxi service. They'd owned it for decades, the Middleton Taxi. Reg was the driver, Wilda was the dispatcher, and we got there, and that was one of the most magic times of the whole trip. Initially, was meeting this small version of my mother. She looked just like Mom, just huge-breasted, tiny little person, and just, it was funny. She was like a mini me to my mother. They had the same mannerisms and that same strange, distant look in their eye. They'd look up in the air and say things that sometimes were horrible. You know, they were reminiscing a lot about their father, who I caught a lot of those conversations. And I remember one day, it was an old farmhouse in the middle of town. It was an old house that the town grew up around it. And it had the old Victorian, it had a sunroom, and all these, double glass French doors, and just an old house, and beautiful old place. And we slept out in the sunroom, in a big bed out there. It was amazing. And so they were sitting around the living room one day, and my mother said something about my grandfather, Les. And I'll never forget, the sun was coming through the window, this 4-pane window on the floor in its perfect shadow, and the carpet was like a burnt orange. And I remember looking at that square on the floor, and Wilda looked at my mother and said, "Yep, he died right there." And she pointed at that spot, and he said, "Yeah, he dropped dead right there on the floor. You get up." He had been sleeping in the place where we were sleeping. He was staying with her when he died. And he got up in the night to go to the bathroom, and when he came back, he had a massive heart attack and was dead before he hit the floor. And she pointed at that spot, and I was just, I was terrified by that, actually, to be honest with you. I was like the guy, somebody that I know, in quotation, died right there on the floor. Like, holy crap. And it was just weird things like that were happening, and things that were being divulged to me, that by virtue of watching my mother interact with all these people, It was real strange. It was really strange and surreal and not entirely pleasant. And Wilda was, distant to me. And but her husband, Reg, he was the funniest guy. I loved that guy, and he loved me. We would laugh, and we'd sit out in front in the taxi office, and we would laugh and cut up and be making jokes, and he'd give me Cokes and candy and whatever, and it was hilarious. We had a blast out there. Child abuse and mental illness is a chain reaction through families. When someone who's abused has children and raises them, there's a lot of things that get passed on inadvertently, and maybe sometimes it's actually genetic and chemical. Maybe there's just a bad gene or a bad wiring job in some people, and they pass it on genetically through their children. And Wilda was so much like my mother. I found out the hard way. My mother was highly, highly paranoid. She was always thought that there was somebody out to get her. Everything that happened was a personal affront to her. It was not. She couldn't just let things be as they were. If something happened, it had to be about her. They were coming after her. And here's a good example of how this ran. I saw this run. I didn't realize it then. Well, actually, I sort of did, but I realize now, looking back at it, that it was that illness had passed through the whole family. And Wilda had a daughter whose name I can't recall right now, unfortunately. I'm embarrassed to say that. But again, this happens a lot to me because I had so little contact with these people and was not raised with them. And it was just like trying to be family with strangers. And, it's been very difficult to incorporate basically a whole other family into the mess I had going, with the family I had. And so she had a daughter, and the daughter had a son named Troy. I remember him because he was a really cool kid, and me and him hit it off like gangbusters. And we were always playing together around the house. He'd come over, and we were into Star Wars at that time, and so he had a few Star Wars, like action figures and toys, and I had some, and we were always playing and doing crazy stuff and finding gigantic spiders around the house and running around like maniacs. And we were fast friends pretty quickly. And so I had their phone number. Somehow they gave me their number, or they wrote it down for my mother or whatever the case was. I can't remember how, but I had the number. Now, at the age of 12 years old, my mother would barely let me use the phone. I wasn't allowed to use the phone. I had nearly zero experience calling people on the phone. My mother didn't like it. She wouldn't let me. She just wouldn't. It wasn't something I was allowed to do. I didn't do it on a regular basis at all. Over my lifetime, I might have called Joe once or twice, or whatever. Like it just didn't happen. And I was shy. I didn't know these people very well. And one evening after supper, I decided I want to call and talk to Troy because I had a question or something. I wanted to talk to him about what we were going to do the next day. We had a game plan, is basically what it was. We were going to do something the next day. I can't remember what it was now, but so I dialed this number, and his mother answers the phone, and I froze. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to talk to Troy. For some reason in my 12-year-old brain, I thought, he'll probably answer the phone. No, it wasn't going to happen. But I didn't know. So she answers the phone, and I get so embarrassed and unsure of what to say. I just sort of stayed on the line for 3 or 4 seconds and didn't know what to do, and I panicked and I just hung the phone up. Well, you want to talk about a crisis occurring the next day? Apparently, I mean, this is before caller ID or any of these things or whatever. Wilda's daughter came down to the house and accused me of making obscene phone calls to her. And my mother and Wilda believed her. And I was so mortified by it that I didn't even say anything. They were like, Did you call her and like breathe in the phone and blah blah blah, and I was just standing there going, I don't know what's going on. And so they actually believed this, all of them. And Troy stopped coming over. And like that's how paranoid all of these people were. I did this stupid thing that I was not intended to be anything of the sort. I froze up on a telephone that I could barely use, and they all of a sudden, Hazel's son's a pervert. Oh my God. So that was, I knew right, I could tell then at that point that there was a serious issue in that side of the family. But I didn't know how to deal with it or compartmentalize it. It was beyond my ken, as they say, of what to do about it. And we were leaving there anyway to go to this house that we'd rented, which was actually a sublet. We were taking the house from this family who only lived there in the summers, and which was a bad idea because I mean we were only going to be able to live there a few months over the winter, which was a nightmare. It turned out to be a nightmare, and so anyhow, we left all that behind, and I never saw Wilda again. But Wilda lived to be, I think, nearly 100, if not 100 years old. She died in a nursing home, and she became quite close with Jim. She was a nice lady. There was nothing wrong with Wilda. She was a nice woman, but she went through the same thing that my mother went through with their father, and I can't even imagine it. It was horrendous. There we were, off to this house, this old Victorian turn of the century fisherman's house in a little community called West Dublin, just down the LaHave River from the town of Bridgewater. And when we got there, I'm telling you, it was something out of a Stephen King movie. We went in this house, and I think there was 2 women in there. I'm not sure if they were in a relationship or what. I don't know. Maybe it was a mother and daughter. I can't remember. I'm not sure, but that all seemed kind of strange. They were just really strange people. And there was this allusion to the fact that their mother was living in the house, but we never saw her. We never saw her. They showed us around the house a little, and told us where everything was and how to operate the. There was an like a real old-fashioned wood stove, like cooktop, like the old-fashioned wood stove that you cooked on. There was an oven in it. That was how old this place was. It was oil-fired and wood-fired, and which would become a problem later on. And so I was always, this place captivated me because it looked like a haunted house in there. It was this place was like, so the ornate woodwork and all the old wainscoting and ancient wallpaper, and it was just a really old house and in good condition. So there was a huge winding, turning staircase upstairs. There was a servant staircase from the kitchen up to the master bedroom. There was like, it was just a really, and there was a widow's walk on the top of the house. And so I started wandering around while my mother was hammering out details with these people. And I go up these stairs, and I get to the top of the stairs, and I look through the railings up onto the the upper floor, and I see this ancient woman standing in the doorway of the bedroom, just looking at me. Doesn't say a word, like she's looking at me like she wants to eat me. And I'm just standing there, and this woman's horrifying looking. And I freaked. I was, enough of this. And I was down the stairs, back down to the kitchen where everybody was. And so that's where we ended up. They shipped all our crates of goods there. Bob came, and he had a dog named Pokey that he left with me, because I always wanted a dog, wasn't allowed to have one. Left the dog there with us, and in moved Dave and Joe with us. So, this was a match made in Hades. Some of the most horrific things that started to happen to me at that point, happened in that house. But also, the best things that ever happened to my music and my development as a player happened in that house. The first problem there was several problems. The first was that Dave and Joe neither one of them had a job, and we were living on Mother's pension. I think Dave had a little money aside, but not much. So the first problem that occurred, we moved into the house in September or October, I believe. And we had an Indian summer. I remember that. It got beautiful and warm, and and there was woods all around the house and rivers and brooks, and the ocean was right there at the mouth of the LaHave River, and I was just completely mesmerized by my surroundings. But winter came, and we had no money for oil. And we were using that stove to heat the house and cook. There was no way you could do it. So we ended up actually blocking off huge sections of the house we tore the cardboard crates our stuff was up into walls, and literally boarded off whole rooms with these cardboard crates we took apart. We duct taped the cardboard over the entrances to these rooms so we wouldn't have to heat them. And we basically lived in the kitchen and the upstairs bedrooms, and that was it. So that was the first problem. So we were facing massive poverty at that point. It was just, I don't know how we were surviving at all. And then came to realize that Dave was insane. David lost his mind. He had a breakdown. For a number of reasons. He had just been torn out of the only life he knew in Thunder Bay. He was still recovering from this cancer. He'd lost his dogs that he had to kill himself. He had no money, no job. He wasn't getting any work as a carpenter. And he was stuck living with a woman that, for all intents and purposes, he absolutely despised. And he started to exhibit frightening, violent tendencies. Just scared the living shit out of everybody in the house, except my mother. That was the problem. My mother and David were like, an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. There was no way my mother was going to back down from her own son. And so things got really, really frightening. around that house. On top of all this, and I have to make excuses for Dave because he never did this again, and I'm fully convinced that he was not in his right mind. Well, it was obvious he wasn't in his right mind, but he did some inappropriate things with me a couple times. Like one time, I remember walking up the stairs. His bedroom was at the top of the stairs on the left-hand side, and the bathroom was behind the staircase. I came up the stairs one day, and I looked over in the bathroom door, and he was standing there with nothing on but a sweater. And he was just looking at me, and he was naked from the waist down. And I got real scared. He looked at me like it's the look on his face. I'll never forget it. And I panicked and froze, and I walked to this window that was in the hallway overlooking the front yard. And I just walked to that window and turned my back on him and prayed that he wasn't going to come anywhere near me. And he stayed there for what seemed like 1,000,000 years, but it was probably only a few seconds, and all of a sudden I heard his footsteps come out of the bathroom, and he walked right behind me and into his room, closed the door. And there was another incident that he made me feel real uncomfortable. And I hate to say these things, but there was just so much sickness, and when Dave was around Mother, he was a different person. He was angry. And like if you in later years, especially after Mother died, Dave changed. It was like when she died, he was freed somehow. And like I said, he never did anything like that again. And I think at some point in time he probably realized how ridiculous, how inappropriate and stupid that was, and because he was a smart man, but he had a total breakdown in that house, and I know that's what it was, because I knew the man before we were there, I knew him after we were there, and that part of his life, I'm actually surprised he survived it, because things got a lot worse as time progressed there. So there was that going on. There was we were just getting the idea from everything he was doing that we weren't safe there. He took me into the woods one day, and I still worshiped this guy, he was still my hero, and my musical hero, and all this stuff, and I wanted to hang out with my brother, right? And he knew all about the woods. He's been a woodsman all his life, and so I went out in the woods with him one day for a walk. He was going to set some rabbit snares or something, and I was right behind him, and he knew I was right behind him. He didn't, and I think he even mentioned to me to stop crowding him, maybe. I can't remember. But he walked by a bush with a big branch full of thorns on it. And when he held the branch and he pushed it and let it fly back and hit me right in the face and almost blinded me. One of these little thorns went in my eyeball, and I was messed up. I couldn't see. I was crying. It scratched my eyeball, my cornea. I couldn't see out of my eye for days. And he acted like it was nothing. He's like, he didn't even pay attention to me. I was back there, almost on my knees, holding on to my face. And I saw him do it, and I couldn't believe he did it. I was just thinking, he just about blinded me. And then all the stories that Bob and Joe used to tell me, about about what he did to them when they were kids. I started to see it, right? I was like, holy Jesus, this guy he's a sadist, sometimes. And what it was with Dave was that it was mother. He something about her drove him crazy. And it all culminated one night and there was a couple other events in that house that scared the crap out of me. One night when Dave challenged Joe, and Joe wouldn't hurt a fly, and Dave got up from the table. Joe was sitting at the other side of the table and had a baseball cap on, and Dave went over and started violently slapping the hat off his head, and Joe would just pick the hat back up, wouldn't look at him. And Dave was challenging him to get up and, make me sit down. You think you can make me sit down? And I was sitting right there beside them. I was terrified. This guy was easily 3 times as violent as mother was. No question about that. And I had these horrible visions of him just snapping and killing all of us. And there was guns in the house. He had brought guns with him. There was a .410 shotgun in the house, and I often pictured myself having to load that gun, shoot him, to keep him from hurting one of us. It was that frightening. And I just turned 13. I turned 13 in that house. And it all culminated one night with an argument between him and mother in the kitchen that got so heated, it got so ugly, that me and Joe retreated to the upstairs of the house and went into the room we were sharing, the bedroom we were sharing. And we just sat there. Joe was sort of laying on the bed, and I was sitting on the bed with him on the edge of the bed, and we were just looking at each other. And the argument got fiercer and louder, and all of a sudden we heard Dave just bellow something. I don't even remember what it was. And it was so scary, I ran. I ran down the stairs, out a side door of the house, and went all the way outside. And I looked in the kitchen window from outside, and I saw them. My mother was sitting in a rocking chair across the kitchen, and Dave was at the table. And I saw them both stand up simultaneously. And they met nose to nose in the middle of the kitchen. And I thought to myself, this is it. One of these people is going to die, because my mother was certainly capable of it, and I knew Dave was, and I thought, this is not going to go well. And my mother, I never saw my mother that angry, and that the look on her face was indescribable. And she got right in his face, and she just told him, "You think I'm scared of you?" I could hear them right through the window. It was as clear as day. And she looked at him, she got right this close to him and said, "If you think I'm scared of you, you better think again. Because I will kill you. There's no question. You're a dead man." And I couldn't believe this. Dave turned around and went and sat back at the table. Unreal. As violent and aggressive as he was afraid of that woman. He was. We all were at a certain point. When she reached that level of whatever it was, everybody ran. And that was the end of things. That was the end of things at that house. I knew right then that it was not going to last. Dave was sort of in and out of the house after that. Everything started to fall apart there at that point. Amidst all this turmoil, and you know, it really boggles my mind that I was able to function with all these things going on. Like, it was just, I look back, well, I mean, again and again, I keep looking back at this and saying, if I hadn't had music, I would probably be dead by now, or in jail, or in whatever. Like, the music always saved me. And amidst all this turmoil and anger and fear and just crazy, crazy things going on, like a great example is the next door neighbor. His last name was Publicover. He was a nice old man. He was in his 70s. He knew all about the house. He came down to the house one day and asked us if we'd seen the two kids. This is a true story. This actually happened. And we were like, what? Whose kids? And he said, the two boys that died in the fire here. And we were like, what? And he said, oh yeah, there was two boys, twin boys that died in the upstairs of the house. A candle started a fire and they were burned to death. And then their mother, in her grief, hung herself in the master bedroom. And I don't know if he didn't seem like the kind of guy that would try to freak you out for no reason, and sure enough, we had heard some strange things around that house, really strange things that were sort of unexplainable. But then I used to go down the end of the road to wait for the school bus, and I found on the side of the road, just, 100 yards away from that house, there were two graves, literally, in the ditch. They were just off the side of the road. Across the ditch, there was two gravestones. And that's where those children were buried. I don't know how, in the name of God, the county ever allowed that to stay there, that they weren't exhumed and moved to a cemetery. And one of those headstones still exists. I was just there 2 weeks ago and to go see the old house of my brothers. Me and Bob and Joe went. And by God, it was still there. One of them is still there. The other one got knocked over, I guess. But there was two graves on the side of the road. And sure enough, yeah, it was a pair of brothers. And so, like, that kind of just absolute weirdness, just, no way around, that's just messed up. So with all of this going on, I came into possession by virtue of, now living with my brothers and all of their possessions around, right? I came into possession and well, at least came into the usage of all my brother's record collection. And the person that I fixated on while I was in that house was none other than Doc Watson. Up until that point, I had basically been a fingerstyle player. That was my weapon of choice, and was studying Chet and Jerry and all this stuff. Suddenly, I realized that Doc Watson was like one of the most exciting guitar players. I mean, I'd heard him all my life, but for some reason, at that point in time, I decided I'm going to learn to play this stuff and play it just like him. And so I sat down with the album, and Joe had set up the stereo in one of the rooms of the house, and I just started listening to Doc Watson incessantly. And it, again, completely altered the path of my music. I learned the vocabulary of Doc, and started to understand more about Americana, it just pushed me like in that American direction. Like my love of bluegrass started to build there, because that was the next logical progression, was from Doc, was to start looking at the other American masters like Bill Monroe and Earl Scruggs, and so I had all this time to myself there a lot of times, and I spent it in front of that turntable, putting the needle back, putting the needle back, putting the needle back, playing one phrase a million times until I had it, and I copied his tone, and I copied his timing, and I figured out what pick to use that would sound the most like him, and on and on and on this went. It completely changed me as a player. And if I hadn't done that, as you'll see as the story progresses, how many weird coincidences happen in that house. If I hadn't have done that, I would not have ended up where I ended up. My career was launched basically because I was a flat picker. That's what got the attention. I would never have been able to do the events that I ended up doing, and I'm going to get into that in a later episode, if I hadn't been a flat picker. That was what sealed the deal with getting me into the public eye, which of course only fired me up even more to keep doing more, keep striving, keep learning. The flat pick is what really built my career. Without it, I could never have followed any of the pathways that I ended up following. So for all the negative that came out of that first dwelling in Nova Scotia, it set me up for the rest of my life, what I would be doing for the rest of my life. And that's amazing. But it's true. Doc Watson was the actual springboard for everything I did after that. And thank God I got to tell him that more than once. I met Doc not long after that, not too many years after all this started there, and then met him several times again in the U.S. And yeah, he was a great man, and a great musician. It's strange, and I guess that's the whole theme of this biography, is it's really strange how such, maybe negative circumstance has brought positive things in my life. I dare say maybe everybody is the same. I don't know. It's hard to say. There's people that tell you, like, this one's born with a golden spoon in his mouth and all this other, or a silver spoon, whatever. Maybe that's true. Maybe some people have no trouble at all in life and just go breeze right through it. They have money, they have power, they have influence, and they're just born into it. That's probably true. But I think the older I get, the more I realize that we learn and gain more from our failures than our successes. I really believe that. Because you can't learn anything from winning. Don't learn nothing from winning. You learn things by losing. That's how you learn stuff and not make the same mistakes over and over again. So, yep. Thank God for Doc Watson. He kept me out of harm's way and started everything for me.